Welcome back to Fitness or Fiction. Today, with my caped crusader beside me, we are going to go after the benefits and claims of benefits of heat exposure. Particularly, we're going to get into infrared. This is a really interesting kind of topic, and it's kind of been further augmented by our recent experience with the accessibility of infrared sauna benefits. Our sponsors at Hydrogun were nice enough to send us an infrared blanket each so we could try them out and see what they're all about, and I love it, man. It's a big deal not taking up all that space and whatever, but we'll get into that later. The first thing that we're going to look at is what are the claims, and then we can kind of talk about the most important ones to us, and then we'll go from there.
So, Mr. Howden, were you aware of all the benefits of infrared sauna? There were so many claim benefits, I had to write them all down on this piece of paper.
I felt like the answer was yes, and then you went through that list, and I was like, oh, man.
Oh, yeah. So, fitness or fiction, if we're cutting through the hype, some of this is fitness where it's truth, and other is maybe a little bit fiction. We're not going to dig too deep into the fiction side. We're going to speak more to the truths and the actual benefits of heat exposure or specifically infrared saunas. But for everyone who wants to know, the claim benefits are improved cardiovascular health, boom, 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 boom. Athletic recovery, whatever that means, could mean a lot of things. Muscle pain relief, a detox of chemicals and heavy metals in the body via sweat. Not sure about that one. You can talk later.
That one's hard. That one's tough, yeah.
Muscle gain and fat loss. Some claims quick fat loss, 600 calories per sauna sesh. That's a lot. That's 3 chocolate bars you can eat while you're in your sauna.
Hey.
Skin rejuvenation, specifically more clear and glowing skin, hence why Mr. Howden's always glowing, especially on camera. Immune system boost, increased cardio performance, better stress resilience, mood improvement, less anger and depression, lower inflammation, cellulite removal, reduced headache intensity, and cancer prevention. How do you feel about that, Mr. Howden? It's a one fix. It's a one.
There's evidence for a lot of this stuff.
Fixes it all.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's important that we talk about the 3 main things, because a lot of these benefits come from the 3 main things that we're going to target today. But as it is, when you're trying to get somebody to buy something, even if it's good for them, what are you going to do? You're going to draw attention to all the possible positives. And I think that list is what we would agree on is quite exhaustive. Like that's some of the stuff that they're bringing up in there is like, I can see it, I can. Is that going to be a primary thing that we're worried about? Well, I don't know.
Yeah, the kicker for me with this stuff is like any health product or fitness product, whether it's a supplement or a sauna blanket, is to what extent does these benefits actually, like on what micro scale are they actually changing or affecting your body? Like it's like, oh, it's detoxing your body. Like, or you're gonna lose weight. Like, is this a viable weight loss solution where you can just start sauning every day and you will noticeably lose 20 pounds in 3 months without doing anything else in your life?
There's a fair chunk of this stuff that could be psychosomatic too, man. Like if somebody truly believes in what they're doing in that sauna, I think it would test out well. Mm-hmm. And we know that's the case. Even when we talk to people about their injuries and we talk to them about the breadth of the damage at their knee or something, we can impact their pain levels. We have really good research on that. Mm-hmm. So like, I actually wouldn't be the first to blow the whistle on a lot of this stuff and be like, no. But I'd probably be more on the side of like, let's talk about the macro scale that we can really get some decent data on.
The bigger stuff, yeah. The biggest one out of all of those to me is the cardiovascular health aspect of it. And I think if we discussed offline, I'll talk a little bit more simplistic and then you can kind of go a little bit more advanced. But the big piece of increasing like the cardiovascular overall health, they had a lot of studies, and I'm actually probably going to look into it while you're doing your little speech from your brain. A big part of it is vasodilation though, which is just increased circulation. And if you get increased circulation, that's going to send new oxygen-rich blood to all the muscles and all the damaged tissue and any inflammation, and help aid and speed up recovery and potentially reduce DOMS. So just increased circulation in general is a good thing.
Yeah, oxygen delivery tends to be important to live. We can say that. That's the easy version. Vasodilation is literally just getting more blood around the system. It's going to open up your your blood vessels and get blood around the system. But when we talk about cardiovascular benefits, a lot of what we're running into is passive cardiovascular action, meaning I don't have to physically exert. I'm not actually doing anything to get the extra activity, which is why you'll see these studies that talk about infrared saunas can help with hypertrophy or muscles getting bigger. Exposure after a cardiovascular session can help improve your cardiovascular adaptation and also help you recover from that bout. And it's because you have these passive cardiovascular inputs, let's say. It's a passive stress on the body, and it's just heat. But when we look at it, they actually will compare traditional sauna to deep infrared sauna as well, because the infrared light is part of the rainbow spectrum, actually. The rainbow spectrum, if you keep going to the red side, it becomes something that your eye can't see, and that's infrared. If you go to the other side where things start getting all on the violet side of things, we actually get to ultraviolet, where you can't really take that in either. But on this side, we're penetrating the tissue, and we're actually creating a core response as far as heat tolerance, saying, you know what, we need to cool the system down. We need to circulate blood, which helps with capillarization, which is getting blood out to the far peripheries. So people that say, well, I have bad circulation, my hands are always cold, good plan. But the cardiovascular benefits, there's multiple studies that demonstrate that there's decreases in all-cause mortality if you're hitting a sauna 20 minutes 3 times a week.
Yeah, there's a bunch of studies in there. I was looking for the exact data. I researched this so heavily this morning that my brain's overflowed with the information, so I can't pull it out of my brain as well as I want. But yeah, there was one study that said that sauna exposure for up to 56 minutes per week accumulated, so not in one setting, has a reduction of by like 40% of all-cause mortality, which is anything that's going to kill you. And then there's different studies in regards to affecting growth hormone. Were you aware with that one at all?
Yeah, so you're going to see multiple studies that talk about hormone balance. And a lot of it, I think, is attributable to we're putting a low-level stressor on the body. And we know that in exercise in general, what we're doing is we're providing a stress to the body, something that the system has to respond to, which makes it kind of counterintuitive. The average person is like, well, I'm already stressed out. I don't need exercise today. And it's like, well, exercise, although it's a low-level stressor on the body, allows you to have the outcomes of responding to that stress where you're physiologically going to respond. And you will see changes in hypertrophy of the brain, actually, frontal lobe and hypothalamus particularly. We'll also see all the neurochemicals get balanced, and those neurotransmitters are big deals. And if all of that stuff is working optimally, you're going to see the brain manage the hormonal system better as well. Mm-hmm. So what I would say the sauna is a really good way to conceptualize it would be thinking about it as like a passive exercise modality.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. One of the claims that was on the piece of paper was better sleep, and part of the reason why it's better sleep is they say if you use the sauna at night because it heats you up after the fact of your body. Like if your body's getting cooked, the internal mechanisms of the body is going to try to cool the body down to counteract what's going on the outside stressor. So, and in order to sleep, what does your body need to do? It needs to cool down by at least 1.5 degrees Celsius in order for you to actually go into a restful sleep. So if you overheat yourself right before bed and then the body's cooling mechanisms all turned on, and that's going to promote that relaxation sensation and feeling and help aid you get to a better sleep.
Well, I can speak to that myself. So with this infrared blanket, like we took the Hydrogun infrared blanket and I just open-faced it, like an open-faced sandwich, and put it across the bed. Me and my wife were laying on watching TV for like an hour. Mm-hmm. And by the end of that, we're actually pretty hot. I had it full blast, and I put the timer on to stop at an hour, which is another thing that's nice. It has a timer to say stop, and you don't want to have any safety issues with it, right? Mm-hmm. But after that, like we don't get that good of sleep. We have 3 little boys in the house, and we're often up at night and whatever else, and we're coming off of the first year of our 1-year-old Leo. So our sleep isn't something that's always really solid. But that night, Sarah's like, man, did I sleep good? I'm like, yeah, I can see it. Like the claim that's made, there's a physiological underpinning to it, but I've also experienced it.
Yeah.
And for me, a lot of times at night, if I wake up, guess why I wake up?
Too hot?
Too hot.
Yeah.
I sleep like a champ for the most part. If I'm asleep, that's what I'm doing, unless a kid comes and wakes me up, mm-hmm. which will take some doing. But if I'm not too hot, I'll sleep the night, and I have really deep sleeps.
Yeah.
So I can see the benefit there myself.
Yeah. For sleep specifically with me, when I use it at night, I'll sit in it for 30 minutes at full blast, and when I get out of it, I want to hit the shower because, you're a little hot and sweaty after that. I want to hit the shower and then go to bed. I don't want to hit the shower after. I just want to you almost just want to pass out right inside and okay, I'm done, because it clocks me out so much, and I do feel like it is a stressor on the body. I feel taxed after the sauna. I am noticeably more fatigued, not just relaxed, but I'm fatigued and I'm tired, and obviously it's important to hydrate after, drinking a little bit of extra water and stuff, but man, that thing beats me up.
Well, and something that's really notable is if you were to contrast the infrared blanket versus higher heat traditional saunas versus steam rooms, I would say it goes in that order as far as the amount that it draws you out as well. So if you were to do traditional sauna with the higher heat, which is pretty typical, you'd feel even more so that way, which is why I actually prefer infrared. There's a lot of extra benefit to doing infrared from what I've read so far.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, my personal experience with steam is you get really hot really quick, but you also have this extra load on your lungs to deal with all the ambient moisture in the air. And I find that one, when I come out of a really heavy steam, that's the one that's hardest to recover from for me.
Really?
Yeah.
I almost feel the opposite. Steam doesn't seem to hit me that hard. I find steam more enjoyable and more relaxing, but from my research, it doesn't have the same benefits. Obviously, you still get a little bit of it, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah. I find if you get a steam room really kicking it, you come out of there and it's whoa.
So the next big claim, actually, this one wasn't even in my little list, but part of the physiological response to getting cooked, if you will, in this microwave is the release of heat shock proteins, which you can geek out on a little bit. When I'm reading, it gets so geeky and so in-depth, when they talk about heat shock proteins, they call it HSP. And if you start trying to go too deep, it's there's HSP 76 and there's HSP 079 and there's HSP. There's multiple.
Yeah, the three most studied ones are 60, 70, and 90, I think.
Okay, so yeah.
They do it by weight.
I'm going to call you a nerd right now, the fact that you know that, but okay. So I went to AI, ChatGPT, and I asked ChatGPT to explain to me how heat shock proteins work very basically. So I'll read it to you for the podcast, and then you can maybe elaborate on it. So heat shock proteins are like tiny little helpers inside our cells. When our cells experience stress or danger, like high temperatures or toxins, the HSP spring into action to protect the cells. They do this by making sure that other important protein in the cells stay in the right shape. Proteins like building blocks that do different jobs in our body, but sometimes when the cells are stressed, these proteins can become misshapen or tangled up, and that can cause problems.
That's actually pretty stellar. So this is where the counterclaim against cancer comes from, just so you know.
Okay.
So cancer would be a misfolded cell. So basically we have satellite cells around each and every cell in our body, and those satellite cells are to be transcribed more DNA. So the nucleus of the cell would say, here's the DNA of this cell, transcribe a new one. And that's what happens with mitochondria at the muscle level. So it's okay, so your body, we know that each cell in your body has to transfer over at some point. Skin cells, they don't last forever. And all of them, they have to have this cycle of transference, right? So you're a different person today than you were 2 years ago. Every cell in your body's turned over.
Every cell, yeah.
So that transcription process is important. When we undergo stressors, oxidative stress, for example, is one that they would talk about a lot. When we undergo that, that's when we'll see the misfolding of a protein. So it's been corrupted, essentially. You can think of it as corrupt data if you want. Mm-hmm. But when you have a cell that's been misfolded, then it's not actually transcribed properly. So it's not going to do its task properly. And if you misfold cells and they replicate themselves a lot, we have cells that aren't doing their darn job. Mm-hmm. And maybe if you've misfolded a cell that continues to replicate itself, it can be really detrimental. And that's when you would start talking about things like cancer. I don't want to get too far into that. But
it's interesting.
When we think about heat shock protein, their main role is to go and protect the system as it stands. It's we know that there's an onslaught coming. Yeah. Right? So how are we going to defend this village? Let's get a wall around this sucker and make sure that none of the buildings come down. That's kind of what they do. Mm-hmm. So heat shock proteins are a really important thing because it regulates the way that our body continues to move forward and also limits the amount of poor cell creation that we deal with. is the way that I conceptualize it.
Yeah, the final statement is think of the heat shock protein as being repair workers inside the cells. When something goes wrong, they step in to fix it and make sure that everything keeps running smoothly.
Yeah, and like you could even think of it as security at the gate.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay, I'm going to make sure everything keeps its own, like everything's going to get rebuilt properly because I've stopped this from happening. That's kind of what their role is.
Yeah.
But heat shock proteins, there's a lot of really interesting research on them. Like I said, there's the three main ones that they research. Those aren't the only ones, but the big thing that we're seeing there is some sort of protection of our homeostatic position, right?
Yeah.
And when we look at aging, what is aging? Aging is cellular breakdown, right? And when we can't replicate effectively anymore, we start losing our elasticity and all these sort of things at the cell level. So heat shock protein is a really important piece of the puzzle because a lot of the claims that are made are underpinned by that actual physiological phenomenon.
So with heat shock proteins, it doesn't just need to come from a sauna. Heat shock proteins are released via exercise, via sitting in the sun, even sitting in a hot tub. I think to different levels and different extents, obviously, but doing it in like a sauna blanket or a traditional sauna is, like you said, like it was a passive way of just getting it to fire.
Yeah, it'd be like passive exercise, kind of. Like you would experience a very similar thing in the sun. It would have to be at a certain intensity, of course. But when you think about the amount of input that it would take to get heat shock proteins going from exercise, like you'd have to be smoking. Meaning that's going to be a really stressful form of exercise.
CrossFit.
Yeah, something like that, or like there's a variety of things. Spin class could probably do something like that too. Hot yoga, they're trying to loop these things in together, right? And your ability to withstand that's really important. And that hot yoga is not the most intense form of exercise, but the heat really adds the intensity component to it. So at the end of the day, that this isn't particularly unique to infrared saunas by any realm of thinking, but it is what I would call a low stress way to get that response, which in our world today, finding ways that you can get a really good input without putting a lot of stress on the system is kind of a good thing.
Yeah. And then our third point that we're going to cover is hormesis. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Hormesis?
Yeah.
Hormesis. This is the first time I seen the word was when I was researching it over the last week here, but hormesis is essentially like a form of stress tolerance and expanding said tolerance.
Yeah, so basically your ability to withstand stress is going to rely on a few things, and there's going to be chemical aspects to it. There's also going to be psychological aspects to that. Yes. The way that you look at things, and I already mentioned the research on people that think that stress in their life is detrimental to their health. It actually correlates really well.
It is detrimental because you believe it.
Yeah, exactly. So on the other end of that, if you teach them the way that you respond to stress is a good thing because it gives you the ability to be more resilient and all these sort of things. If they have positive attribution theory towards stress, we actually see much better health outcomes. But what do you hear from the average person in our culture today?
Well, stress is bad.
Oh man, stress kills.
Yeah.
Kills. Sitting's a new smoking. Stress kills. Like it's one of these things that I actually think it's really important to be able to shoulder the load that life presents you, and that's exercise could fit into that, but it also comes into mental stress as well. Like, how am I going to respond to a day where I have too much to do and not enough time?
Yeah.
Am I going to have a strategy to that where I can triage things to get the most important stuff done? And can I be okay being like, I can't do that today? That's going to fall into another day.
Yeah.
So when we start getting into that, it's like, yeah, well, this whole thing with stress tolerance, heat is a great way of doing that. I use Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for that. Like specifically, I'm training.
You like to fight people for your stress hormesis.
No. I'm training heat tolerance there.
Yeah.
Like I'm not using an infrared sauna. I'm using exertion. And in BJJ, like you're constantly moving for position, meaning it's challenging. And when I used to wrestle, man, like nothing feels like the cardio in wrestling. But it used to be that if I got my leg to totally give out on me where it just wouldn't work anymore, it would take a long time to bring it back. Now I can get it back under me in about 10 minutes. It's still not perfect, but it's like in about 10 minutes I can look functional again. I'll still walk like an idiot a bit, but for me, that isn't just the physiological input either. It's the way that I'm conceptualizing it and the way that I'm telling myself that things are going to be better and that it's okay and it doesn't matter that other people see that. So I think that when we start talking about the stress tolerance level, there's that chemical cascade, and I think that's a real thing. But on the other end of it, the way that you're thinking about that and having experienced what real challenge is like and working through it is just as much of a benefit.
Yeah. I think if we're talking about hormesis as like stress adaptation, it's an event can happen to one person that's going to ruin their entire day, and that same event can happen to another person, and then it doesn't even faze them at all. So a little bit of that could be like, again, your psychological outlook on that. But if I was driving down Deerfoot and my tire popped off my car and I freaked out, oh my God, and I pull over to the side of the road and I'm safe and everything's fine, and somebody calls me, I'm like, I had the worst day, I almost died, it was so stressful, like, oh my God, like my car broke down, how am I going to fix this, and money and this and that and this. Whereas another person might just be like, oh man, I got so lucky today. Holy. And be like, what do you mean you got so lucky? Be like, I was driving down Deerfoot, my tire popped off. No damage. I was able to just pull over the side of the road, poof, perfect, easy. I walked over the road, picked up my tire, put on the spare, whew, legend. And they're like, that's accurate representation of an outlook. Like even if somebody gets in a car accident, I had the worst freaking day ever, so terrible, I got in a car accident, somebody rear-ended me. Or somebody can be like, oh man, I got so lucky. I crashed my motorcycle, for instance, 10 years ago. I rear-ended a car, doing about 50 kilometers down 16th Ave. When I rear-ended the car, I flew over my bike over the car and landed on the pavement and pulled myself up. I talk about that story as obviously it sucked. I crashed my bike, but I had zero damage, zero injuries. My jeans were torn all over the place. No blood, no scratches. They were now my lucky jeans, and I continued to wear these torn up jeans because I was like, these are my lucky jeans. They saved
frame
me.
Those. Yeah, frame them. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a stress adaptation of like stress resilience or stress tolerance. And I think I explain this to people that tolerance applies to multiple aspects in life. So if you train your stress tolerance in a sauna, or you train it in like cold exposure, that's going to translate to other aspects in life. If some guy cuts you off in the freeway, or if you're a cashier and a customer starts yelling at you, if you have a higher stress tolerance, it's not going to affect you quite as badly.
Man, in mobility training, like when we run our kin stretch or joint level strength classes in Calgary Movement Studio, what we run into often is you can see around the room what people's tolerance towards stress is like. Because like what we're asking you to do is just hold a position, right? And your body, as we show you how to do progressive and regressive angular isometric loads, you're contracting your muscle hard, and then you're settling down and letting that go, and you're getting further in. But you can see what the individual levels is like. And when it comes to exercise, I often talk to people about, man, when you go through something that really sucks, your whole scale shifts. Because like the level of suck you've experienced is now, let's say the level's now a 20, something at like a previous 10 isn't going to bother you near as much. So when we talk about stress resilience, it has its chemical component. It does. There's a variety of cascades that fall into that. And, I would actually say heat shock proteins are part of that. And then there's this kind of psychological aspect where the way that you look at it and the scale that you place it on based on what you've experienced before and all that sort of stuff, and the outlook that you've developed, that really has an important input as well. So, but with all of this stuff, when we get into the actual blankets that we've been using, the Hydrogun infrared blankets, I think that it's important that we talk about a few things. And one of the things would be like, my first concern when I heard about it, I'm like, space saving, whatever, I like that. But my first concern was like, well, is that going to get too hot? Like, what's it going to look like for safety?
Well, before we even go into that, I just wanted to say, I'm going to toot Hydrogun's horn a little bit. I know me and you, we've been in the health and fitness industry for 15 years for you, more than that. They're 12 years for me. we wanted to make sure that we were partnered or aligned with somebody that was legit. With the podcast being fitness or fiction, we didn't want to get on a juice cleanse sponsor for your facial cleansing and hormones and
Oh yeah. We didn't want to go off the rails. Yeah.
Yeah, so Hydrogun on their website, I find the reason I'm bringing this up, a lot of fitness products will boast every little thing, every claim under the sun to try to maximize their selling feature. Look at all of these things, like we discussed at the start of the episode, all of these things that it does. Hydrogun specifically has 3 titles on what their infrared sauna blanket, their Heatpod does. So the first one is improve systemic health and recovery, and it talks about improving blood circulation, which we just talked on. The next one was boosting recovery and enhances performance, and that's talking about muscle soreness, stiffness, increasing growth hormone production. We can talk a little bit about that if you wanted to. And then the last one is lower stress and increases well-being, which is pretty much everything that we just covered, and you didn't even know that I was going to read that out.
Well, that makes me feel good. Like they're not overreaching on this thing. And, we talked about all of that, even the HGH thing. That's not something that would be surprising for me.
So there was a study that I'll tell you about, and for overall, when we were talking about the all-rate cause mortality reduction by 40%, the research behind that is actually the more you use the sauna, the greater the benefits are. Like there's not diminishing returns, like 7 days is better than 6, 6 is better than 5, so on and so forth. So the more you use your sauna blanket or sauna or heat exposure, the better. In regards to increasing growth hormone, this might be something I could imagine you might geek out on later, is the study is actually reduction in usage of the sauna. So you only use it one time, but in a 2-hour sprint. So at the maximum tolerance that you can handle. Obviously, user beware and stay hydrated, take care of yourself and everything. But the idea was, for a person like yourself, if you wanted to see an increase in growth hormone production, it was 16 times increased growth in hormone. Like it was huge, but it had to be 30 minutes as hot as you can handle. Get out for 5 to 10 minutes, get back in for 30 minutes as hot as you can handle, 5 to 10 minute break, 30 minutes until you hit a 2-hour stretch. And the research showed a 16 times increase in growth hormone production.
Yeah, studies like that, I would be really interested to see what it'd be over time, because the body will downregulate when there's huge changes like that.
Yeah, and I never went into it deep enough, but I'm sure you could go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, we need to have the chemical structures in place to do the amount of cell mitigation that we need to, right? So it doesn't surprise me at all. And when we talk about recovery, we can talk about recovery in a few different silos as well. Like the circulatory and oxygen delivery mechanisms would be things that you would talk about as far as recovery. And you'll see a lot of that stuff in hyperbaric chamber research, where they're exposing people to high levels of oxygen, right? And they're using that for a lot of things. And actually, they started doing that for MS recently, which is interesting. But then you have different realms where it's like, well, the heat shock protein thing as far as protective mechanisms, and then you're also going to have the recovery of damaged cells after a workout, and all of these different things. But for me, it's very encouraging when you see something that's just really clean. Like, hey, here's the big ones that you're going to notice. Like, we could go down the line and really talk about things. Even when we talk about the cancer thing, I can see where that contention would come from, but it's pretty far down the line. And it's really, I'm happy that they didn't lean on the real far periphery stuff too much.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the Heatpod specifically, this specific blanket. I know me and you were super excited to get it. I wanted to get like a real sauna box in my house, but I just don't have the space. That was my biggest issue. I don't know about you.
No, it's the same thing for me. We have somebody in our basement, so the deck pad downstairs is spoken for.
Yeah.
So we just don't have the space for it, even though I really like it as an idea. And the other thing that is a limiter, like we used to have a hot tub, and one of the things that annoyed me is trying to do all the upkeep to it and whatever. And if you have a standalone sauna, that exists too. Like, you're gonna have to turn it on and wait for it to heat up before you go down there and all this. Like, there's a lot of stuff that goes into a standalone unit.
Yeah.
So the Heatpod thing for me was very interesting right away, from the space component, but also from the upkeep, because like, how long does it take that thing to heat up?
It's pretty quick.
Yeah,
Very
like
quick.
2 minutes.
Yeah. So what's your experience been with it just overall? Like we've had it for about 3 to 4 weeks now. What's your usage? Like how often have you been utilizing it? Where do you use it? When do you use it?
I use it right before bed. I've used it a few times, kind of closed up how it's supposed to be. I've used it a few times where I'm kind of sharing the wealth with my wife. I call it open face sandwich. Yeah. So we would just lay on the blanket and watch TV, and you don't get as warm that way, but you can also go for long exposure that way too.
Yeah.
So my experience with it is that if you really want to get hot, like you got to turn it all the way up and you should close it down on yourself. I found for myself, if I wanted to get it really hot, I would just put a blanket across the top under my chin so nothing escapes. And it sealed it up real good and it got way hotter. For me, it's been a really comfortable experience. One of the things that I would say with it is wear clothes.
Yeah.
Because then you don't need to clean up so much after.
Yeah.
and a quick spray down with just like you would do in the gym after you're done using equipment would probably be a good idea. I do that just because I don't want it to get
Trying
stinky.
to take care of it, yeah.
Yeah. So I do that. But then if I'm going to have a shower, I do that. I don't sweat that much, but I still hop in the shower afterwards before bed. And it's comfortable, man. I'm really surprised, especially because when you're done, it's easy to fold up, put in the bag, and then I just put it in the closet. It's like it doesn't even exist. It's cool.
Yeah. For me, I've been using it. I've been trying to jump into it about 3 to 4 times per week, and I do it right before bed. For me, it's folded up nicely, kind of just right beside my bathroom, and I can just pop it out. It's like 3 folds, like 1, 2, and then it opens up, bang, and that's 3. It almost takes like 5 minutes for it to heat up. It heats up very quickly. If it's not at max temp in 5 minutes, it's getting close.
Yeah, I'd say max in 5, yeah.
Yeah, so it gets real close there. I don't know about you, what you do in it. I like to get a little hippie. When I jump into it for the first 10 minutes, I'm doing like a 10-minute meditation, or I'm just closing my eyes, trying to just decompress the day and have no stimulus. And that's when it's most comfortable for me, because you're like, oh, it's nice and cozy and warm in here. That nice and cozy and warm sensation only lasts so long before it starts to be like, whoa, it's getting a little hot in here. It's not so cozy anymore. I've warmed up now, and now I'm getting hot. And there's a difference in that sensation. So after I've done my 10-minute meditation, I'll set a timer beside me, because you can pop your arm out and hit your little timer. After I've done that, then I'll normally opt in for like 10 to 20 minutes of watching a show on the iPad, and I'll just kind of snuggle up and watch a show. One thing I've wanted to do that I have not yet was wear a toque, because we're in Canada, and you probably have got like 120 toques in your collection.
Lots of toques.
Yeah, we have all the toques. So I wanted to wear a beanie or a toque to try to increase that temperature a little bit, So I think if you slap a toque on, put that towel on to insulate like you're talking about, that would be pretty money.
Yeah, I usually talk to people with exercise being like, hey, the set of 10 that you did, especially your last set, we did all the previous repetitions to get to the point where this is going to be effective, right? Mm-hmm. I consider that with the blanket as well, where it's like, okay, so I spend the first 15 minutes really getting to the uncomfortable temperature. And I'm at 15 minutes, I'm super uncomfortable with my stuff with heat, right? Mm-hmm. And the 15 minutes after that, if I'm doing a half hour, that's where the real training starts.
Yeah.
And the last 5 minutes in particular, I find myself checking the clock like, oh, come on, man, how much is left?
Yeah, by like 25 minutes, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm ready to go now. Like, you can bing any time.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, the 30-minute mark tends to be kind of the perfect spot. On the open face one, man, I can leave it there for 60 or more minutes, but like that's what I would call low-level heat exposure. You're probably going to get still some benefits from the infrared.
Have you done more than 30 minutes with it closed?
No.
I have not either. And that's just, I feel like 30 is enough. I feel like you could do more, like you can do up to 60, and their website recommends 60 minutes is a good number to do, but man, that would be a prison of heat.
Smoking hot.
Super hot.
I want to work up to 60. I think after 60, I'll be like pretty handicapped walking away. But recently I did some heat exposure. So I was out at Nationals coaching Damien, and we're out in Ontario, and his grandparents that we were staying with, they have like a gym attached to their condo. So we went down to the gym, and it's a pretty nice space. It has a pool and everything. And then in the men's locker room, and the women's, each have their own. they have a dry sauna, and it doesn't have a thermostat, so it just keeps rolling. And we went in there and we set the alarm for a half hour, and I had some water with me and whatever. And I said, Damien, just don't freak out. This is going to get rough. Like, I'm going to need your help opening the door after and whatever. It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay. So we did 30 minutes. By the end of it, breathing, my nose was hurting. Like, it was so hot, right? And we'd also made the decision that we weren't going to contrast. So we were going to let our body cool down after. So I had a hard time crawling out of this thing. I asked him like 7 times, when's this up? Oh man, seriously? Like, I was having a hard time. But by the end of it, crawled out and laid on the pool deck. So I laid on the pool deck, and it took like, oh man, it probably took 25, 30 minutes to cool down from that.
Yeah.
But that evening and the following day, I felt great on my feet. So I really do think that there's something to that, especially, I hate to say it, but it seems like either multiple exposures of hot and cold, or just get hot and then let your body figure it out. And so that's something that I'd like to work up to on the blanket, but that's going to take some training. And it's interesting talking about heat exposure as training. It's weird.
Yeah, you wouldn't think of it as training per se. For the safety features for the Heatpod, I think we can talk about it very generally and basic. It's a very high quality product though, so it's got sensors in it to shut it off if it's overheating.
It has built-in thermistors.
Thermistors? Didn't I say thermostat?
Yeah, thermistors. Yeah, if it goes too high, it'll just shut off.
Yeah, it just shuts off. It's got a timer. I think the max it does is 90 minutes.
I think so. I haven't checked the max.
Yeah, it's either 60 or 90 minutes, but it'll auto shut off at that point.
And it beeps really big so that you know it's off. I like that.
Yeah. When you store it and when you put it away, when you're done with it, you want to make sure that it fully cools down before you actually pop it away. You said you use yours on your bed.
Yeah.
You just throw it on the bed and you just get
Just let her rip.
just toasty in there. I put mine on the carpet floor, but I don't notice that like the heat is transferring to the carpet or to the floor very much. Like, it doesn't make me feel like it's going to burn the house down.
No, like when I take it off my bed, I'm going to go to bed after, right? By the time I go and brush my teeth and get ready for bed
The
and
bed's
everything,
cool.
and bed seems fine.
Yeah.
So,
Do you have any pros and cons? Pros.
a huge pro is going to be space, man.
Space saving.
Yeah, I think on the other aspect of pro would be that it's it's quick to set up. Like it's not walking all the way downstairs and turning on the sauna and coming all the way back up and whatever. It's literally like 1, 2, 3, go. And I just leave the cord beside my bed, so I just plug it in and give her heck. But I like that I don't really need to wait for it. Like, I set it up and I get in.
Yeah.
And it's smoking hot real fast.
You can set the timer for 35 minutes and count the 5 minutes as a warm-up.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. As far as cons, I don't know, man. Like, what would you say is a con?
So the pros for me are definitely the size. I love the fact to be able to lay down. I love the fact to be able to access my hands when I want them and be able to like poke my iPad or my cell phone and then kind of tuck them back in there. For me, one of the pros is I'm 6'1", and I was concerned that I might not fit in there fully comfortable. It's advertised that it'll fit a 6'5" person, but at 6'1", I feel like it's almost the perfect fit for me, where my toes and feet are comfortably kind of poking the end, and it's still at my neck where I want it to be. For me, one of the biggest pros was when I was utilizing it at its, like, when we had it, my ankle was broken, and it was very uncomfortable for me to lay my ankle. I was like, how do I put my foot? Do I put my foot sideways like this, or do I have toes up? Like, everywhere I go, it's uncomfortable for my foot, but I want to be in there. When we talk about increased circulation, my ankle always felt better when I got out of the blanket.
Interesting.
Being all the blood and inflammation and swelling is just pooled into my foot. My foot is 3 times the size of what it normally would be, and I crawl in that thing. It heats up my whole body and circulates everything. Like, I just found that there was better flow, and it just felt way better when I got out.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. As far as cons, I don't know, man. Like, I think people would probably construe storage as a thing. It's not that big, but you would need somewhere to put it, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's a thing. It's way less than a dry sauna, though, so it would be hard to construe that too far.
Yeah. I also noticed, for me being so long, the most comfortable position for me is, when you're in a sit-up position and you're laying on your back and your feet are going up, I can basically pull that blanket into that position, and that was most comfortable for me. So I was kind of sitting like I was in a sit-up position, laying down for maximum comfort for So it's not like you're kind of like stuck in this rigid position and you're stuck.
And it does get a little more flexible over time too. So
yeah, to make sure that this is not a completely like biased review, like, oh my God, it's all that in a bag of potato chips. I do have some cons in my brain.
Yeah, let's hear it.
One of the cons for me is I definitely noticed that it's colder on the zipper side. So it opens up like a zipper, and I'm centered. I'll kind of shimmy my way a little bit to the side that's a little bit more closed off. I find that the heat distribution obviously it's not quite as good at the zipper side. I think, like you said, sealing your neck with a blanket or a towel would probably maximize it. We're talking, these are nitpicks, obviously, but nitpicks nonetheless.
I found a way around that a little bit.
Zipper?
Yeah, I fold it under me and then I just shimmy over and lay on it.
See, we all have strategies.
Yeah. Yeah. So that actually seemed to straighten that out really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as cons, it's any con that you would come up with would be logistic.
Yeah.
As far as function and form, I can see people having a hard time understanding that it doesn't need to be super smoking hot right away.
The sensation of it is different. So there's something about getting in a wooden box with the smell of the wood and going in there with less clothes on and seeing the sweat visibly drip off of you. It feels different. The experience is different. When you're in the sauna blanket and I'm wearing socks, sweats, and a shirt, I know I'm sweating, but my clothing is kind of catching all the sweat. And so when I come out of it, I'm not sweaty. And I take my clothes off and I'm still not sweaty. I'm just hot. So when I jump in the shower, so it's a different experience, but the sensation it derives from me is the same.
I think the experience and cleanup would probably be the things that people don't like about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the experience of it. Well, it's not like I have the whole sauna space, and some people really enjoy going to a public facility where there's the infrared sauna and they can see the usual characters and have a conversation, stuff like that.
What do we used to call that for a workout?
The executive.
The executive workout. Just a nice sauna, a
That's
spritz.
Right. Yeah, schwitz.
A schwitz.
Yeah. But like outside of that, you really should clean it up after. So making sure that you have like a disinfectant spray and a cloth nearby. I think that'll probably improve longevity of it and at least make it less stanky.
Yeah. So by now, if you're watching the video of this episode, you should have seen what it kind of looks like in general with Curtis unfolding it, hopping into it and all that jazz. I'm going to show you guys now going forwards as we do our final thoughts in our outro, what it looks like in my space. So in my bedroom where it is, where I kind of store it, how I lay it out, how I unfold it, and kind of just how big it fits in the room and how space saving it is. So like final thoughts for me on the blanket is I'm pretty stoked with it. I think it's pretty sweet. I like it beyond the health benefits. I like the relaxation. It's almost like forced meditation for me. I'm a big believer in meditation and that stress tolerance like approach to life. But I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, so I was really excited about this one. The percussive massage guns that we got, our Hydra guns. I like those. They're good, but for me, I was more excited about the infrared therapy because we don't have that at our gym. I used to have that at the gym that I worked at. I don't have that at the gym now. And the steam, like I said, draws me out real bad, so it's not really an option. Mm-hmm. So I was really excited to get it. I was hoping it would have the same benefits, and I would actually say that it's lived up to expectations and then some. Like it's easier to take out and put away than I thought. I thought getting it back in its bag would be annoying afterwards. It's really not.
I've noticed you got it in the bag over there. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
It was pretty easy to slip in that bad boy.
Yeah.
It's not like like a tent?
Yeah.
Where you pull a tent out of a bag the first time and it never goes back in?
Ever. No. And then you
three
rip the
people,
bag.
just jamming it in there.
Well, but even walking in with it today, like we're obviously in the Calgary Movement Studio, so I had to bring it to work. But even walking in with it, it's just like walking around with a duffel bag. Like I've been really happy with it as far as form and function.
I think it would be very interesting to contrast this episode for our next episode to talk about cold exposure.
You're going to contrast heat with cold? Classic.
Do you do the cold exposure?
I do. Yeah, I've done that a few times.
No, you don't, you wuss. Just kidding. I've seen you walk into glacier water before.
Yeah.
And I questioned it too. We hiked a mountain and you're like, I'm just going to strip down to my skibbies and go and jump in that glacier water. And I'm like,
there was ice floating by. That was so cool.
I was like, why? You're like, it's good for you. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, this was back before it was cool. I'm a hipster.
This was before it was cool. This is probably like 8 years ago. More than that. Waterloo hike.
Waterton.
Waterton.
Yeah.
What am I talking
That would have been 2012. 11 years.
Yeah. So cold exposure next episode.
Sounds good.
We'll pair that with heat.
Let's do it.
Maybe breath. See how much of a hippie you are.
Sounds good.
If you guys like this episode, remember to hit subscribe, like, leave us a comment if you have any thoughts on the Hydrogun Heatpod. And we have a link for a discount in the description below. I'm probably also going to link a couple of my own favorite snippets on YouTube talking about the benefits of infrared saunas via Andrew Huberman, who's the neuroscientist at Stanford, and he geeks out. He gets a little bit more specific and geeky than we did on the exact variables on what's most optimal, as well as cold exposure. But if you guys are interested, you could check that out as well. Thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate your support.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, follow, and throw us a like on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts.